Welcome, everyone, to the SnapCast Podcast with your hosts, Brad O'Brien and Mike Cooley.
Yo.
This is episode 77. Lucky sevens, mofos. And in case you're wondering what the hell you just tuned into, this is a Magic the Gathering podcast where we talk about magic and magic-related things. We are geared towards the casual Magic player that has a competitive interest in MTG finance, where you make all the money from the cards. And it's a realm that is increasingly more difficult as the days go by.
I think that WotC is actively working behind the scenes to play both sides. I actually think that they've made some brilliant moves over the last few years to make the game generally more affordable and more collectible. And what a time to be in this game. I learned something new today.
What'd you learn?
Did you know that Richard Garfield had a concept for the Magic metagame even before the tournament result metagame that we think of now?
Now, what do you mean? Like the game in general? Or like, what do you mean? Because I know that Richard Garfield actually had a whole bunch of conceptual things that he had all planned out, and he was just trying to pitch it to people and get his product signed to some big label, basically.
I mean, he was a smart dude. Richard Garfield, PhD.
Hey, yo, yeah, he pulled it off.
So when we think about, I was listening to some guys over at the Serum Visions podcast earlier this week, and they were talking about this, and it really stuck with me that we think of the metagame as the percentage of certain kinds of decks in the field, you know, the popularity of archetypes, and really even I think we micromanage it down to specific decks in the field. Like, is the metagame friendly to humans right now? Is it friendly to artifacts? Right? When Richard Garfield was thinking about the metagame is everything outside of actually playing a game of Magic.
What?
So the secondary market,
no kidding.
card stores, in
Smart man.
In that definition, podcasts, content creators, people that are writing about it, that's the meta game. That's everything sort of around the concept of the game.
Yeah.
And so when I heard them talk about it, I was like, God damn, we're a metagame podcast.
Yeah, we kind of are. We kind of are when you think about it in the traditional Richard Garfield sense like that. That's really cool, man. I think his head was in the right place because, we were just kind of passively talking before the podcast started about really what makes games in general, not just Magic the Gathering, but games in general, absolutely historic. And I mean, like, they last for years. They survive the test of time. And there's a couple of factors that, I've observed personally, but they also are tried and true, proven. And Magic the Gathering, I think, meets both of them, dude. The first one is the elements of the game hold some sort of real world value. You know what I mean? They in a substantial real world value. Not just like, oh, my Pokemon cards are worth 10 cents a pop. Well, some people wouldn't really consider that value. You know what I mean? But when you're talking like real money, like for example, everybody knows I played Diablo 2. The intellectual property items of that game, especially depending on your time frame, whether you're doing it on a ladder reset or whatnot, are worth money outside of the game. You actually, you want to get your Shaco on day one. Well, you're going to have to pay $20 for that. Like, you know what I mean? That's just how it is. That piece of that game, the outside value, the trading community of that game has made it survive 20 plus years. And the fact that Magic cards, some of them hold astronomical value, but even the ones that are reprintable, that show up in a lot of decks, that have even seen a couple of reprints in the last few years, have creeped up to $30, $40 again.
Oh, yeah. And some even more.
Yeah, some even more. And it's like, that's one of the pieces that makes a game survive the test of time. And it seems like that's what Richard Garfield was focusing on.
When he wanted it to be a collectible card game.
Yeah, when he thought about the meta game, as you put it, he's thinking about the stuff outside of the game. And just to finish this point, and what we'll get into more in a minute in this cast, is the other piece that if your game doesn't have any value, if the components of your game doesn't have any value outside of what you pay for it just to play, one thing that makes a game survive the test of time and really last long in the minds of players and keep the interest of players for years and years and years is the complexity of the decision trees that are allowed in the game, right? So think about games that people are still experimenting with to this day because the decision trees in the game are so large, you know what I mean, that people don't really know the true answer. There's always something better that is discovered or whatnot. There's always something new to be made. That's also a factor that keeps games just surviving and outlasting the test of time. Magic has that one too. And with this new Dungeons and Dragons release that we're going to get, we have added a whole new level of complexity into the game that make these decision trees and these new things that could possibly arise from the game. It makes those possibilities so much larger because some of the cards utilize a zone that in Eternal formats has not really been utilized really ever in some Eternal formats. So I'm curious to see what it brings to the table. I'm also curious to kind of dive in and talk about what this might do to the value of some cards. What cards does this mean something for? Utilizing this zone, these are the things that we're hoping to get to on this podcast and really dive into today.
I'm actually trying to find let me find the Wizards of the Coast announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to dive into to what some of these new mechanics, like this new thing is that I'm just learning about that you just told me about?
Well, that's why I want to look up the actual Wizards announcement because I brought up an article that really showcases the cards.
Yes.
But one of the things that's interesting about this announcement, and I want to make sure that we get it right, is that we want to talk about, basically, just to cut to the chase, is the new dungeon mechanic and the dungeon cards.
Yes.
And so we have a whole new card type, and they are going to interact in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And
we're going to piece this out right here on the cast and look at this. We're going to look at how things are said. We're going to look at keywords. And us, we're going to scrutinize every word. We're going to look at it, and we're going to try to figure out how to break it. It's just what we do.
Adventures in the Forgotten Realms mechanics. Actually, WotC has a video on it. Why don't we show the video?
Fuck it. Jam it.
This is a thing we can do. We have the technology.
We do.
Sooner or later, most D&D adventures end up in a dungeon. And for good reason. The action, the mystery, the loot. Dungeons are where it's at. And it's time to venture forth on this edition of First Look, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
First of all, I gotta say,
Dungeon
I really love
is a new card type. There are 3 dungeons being introduced in this set, including Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Ooh. That's a lot to take in.
Pause it there for a second. Yeah. So, and exit out of that little play next so people that are watching on YouTube can see this. So this is the most complex one I've seen so far, I think. But these new dungeon cards, and for those people that are listening on the audio, we're going to explain basically what we're seeing here. We're seeing an entirely new card, which the zone that it exists in, we'll talk more about in a minute. But basically, these cards allow you. There's certain cards released in the set that will trigger your advancement through these dungeons.
So the way that I conceptualize the dungeons is that it's a pick your own adventure saga.
It's like a game going on within the game. It's like Shahrazad, or however you pronounce it. Yeah, however you pronounce that card from back in the day. Yeah, it's like a game that's going on.
It's a sub game.
Yeah, it's a sub game that's going on while you're playing your own game of Magic. This is so insane. I absolutely love it. Like, I'm not a big D&D fan myself.
Did you notice what I named the episode?
Yeah, Troll the Dungeon.
Trolls in the Dungeon.
Trolls in the Dungeon.
Because you and I are trolls, and, we're going to talk about the dungeon cards.
We do all right. Yeah, I mean, this is really cool. So, like, the things that allow you to progress through the dungeon, like, you start up, and when something tells you, like, you're entering a dungeon or whatnot, the card is set up vertically, and you start at the top of it, and it's almost like, think of like one of those mazes that you used to get through on the back of a cereal box, right? It's kind of like what these look like, but at each turn, you have a decision. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You can go one way or the other, and whichever way you go determines what triggers here.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. So like this one, you start up, we'll just walk you verbally down through this dungeon, right?
Well, I imagine that's what's going to happen in the video.
Yeah, let's jam it. Let's watch this.
You pause the video and read, and we'll catch up in a few.
Hey, nice. We were so far ahead of our game there.
Now, dungeons. They don't go in your deck. They start outside the game. You can keep them with your sideboard, but, and this is important, they don't take up sideboard spots. Okay. You just have access to them.
Okay.
And you bring them into the game whenever you venture into the dungeon.
Okay.
Venture into the...
So, like you said, there's cards that you have to play that call kind of out, that tell you to go into a dungeon.
If I have like multiple dungeons at my disposal, can I choose which ones to go in?
So, yes. And from what I've seen, there are only 3 dungeons, and I actually said at the start, as of right now, there's only 3 dungeons.
Okay.
And when it tells you to venture, it doesn't tell you which dungeon to go into. You choose,
Oof.
But you can only be in one at a time.
Oof. All right.
Word action that lets you interact with dungeon cards.
Venture.
That action is found on cards that very much do go in your deck, like Shortcut Seeker. When you're told to venture into the dungeon, first ask yourself, Self, am I in a dungeon? You don't know what that means yet, so let's just say you're not.
Okay.
If you venture into the dungeon while you're not in a dungeon,
I think I can figure out what that means, though.
Outside the game and put it into the command zone.
Command zone.
Venture marker
command
on the
zone.
First room at the top.
That's big.
That's big. So we'll talk more about this in a minute, but when this gets called into existence, it goes into the command zone.
Which is not a zone that has ever existed in 60 card formats.
Yeah, like Legacy or Vintage. Oh my gosh, can you imagine how much this is gonna fucking till to those formats?
I mean, I don't know. Let's continue.
A venture marker is something small that you can use to keep track of what room you're in. For example, a coin, a die, an expertly painted miniature, whatever you have handy.
This is really cool. They're lighting up the room on their visual.
Including the first one.
That's so
cool. Looks like a
room ability triggers.
D2.
Yeah.
The effect of that ability is what you see printed in each room. For example, when you enter the yawning portal, you gain 1 life. The room names are for flavor and don't affect gameplay. Now that you're in a dungeon, the next time you venture into the dungeon, move your venture marker down 1 space.
So that's that key word.
Your next venture will carry you to the dungeon level, and the one after that will give you a choice. You could head...
Now that's cool. So when I sort of compared these to sagas, you have to move in order. Like you said, we move from top to bottom.
Yep.
But after the first 2 rooms of this dungeon card, or the first 2 chapters of this dungeon saga in my brain, you can choose one of 2 effects.
Right. We're looking at Dungeon of the Mad Mage, if you guys want to look it up and follow along. So
Goblin Bazaar or the Twisted Caverns. Either way, you'll end up in the Lost level. One more choice determines how you'll get to the Deep Mines, and finally, the Mad Wizard's Lair.
So just to break that down, like, for the people listening audio-wise, he's really pissing through all the dungeons.
He's going through it quick. Yeah.
I mean, you could hear him explaining this stuff, that like you have some decisions to make, but your cards have to basically trigger you to go on to the next step here. You have to have this keyword of like, enter the dungeon or whatnot.
And, pick a dungeon you have.
And it basically, that keyword will allow you to either bring up one of these dungeons that you have at your disposal or advance through it. And you have certain choices along the way that you can make, which are really cool, man. Like,
they are really cool, and they definitely force you to think ahead. And I mean, to get through one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rooms, you need to have 7 cards that send you on adventures.
But here's the other thing too, right? Is like, it also, not only does it give you more decisions, but it also affects your opponent's gameplay. Like, they can see what the next choices that you have are, but they don't know what you're going to choose. You know what I mean? So it's like the level of complexity there to be able to play the player, the meta gaming is insane. Like, the door is open for some meta gaming. And I personally love that.
I know how much you love to play your opponents, but from what I've seen from the 3 dungeons that are going to exist, there isn't anything that appears to be too broken about it. But now that we've sort of listened to and talked through kind of how these physically work, you move a little counter down level by level based on the choices that you want to make. Let's see what they say about the rest of this.
Lair. Each player gets their own dungeon, and a player can be
I'm
in
trapped
only
in a
one
dungeon.
dungeon at a time. Once you enter a dungeon, you must complete that dungeon before starting a new one.
Okay.
Every time you venture, you'll progress deeper and deeper until you hit the final room at the bottom of the card.
Can you start the same dungeon
As soon as the final room
over?
ability resolves, or it's countered or somehow leaves the stack, the dungeon is removed from the game. This action means you've completed the dungeon.
Removed from the
Completing a
stack?
dungeon
Hold
is
on.
great for a few reasons.
Let's go back and
The
hear
next
that
time you
again.
venture
Yeah,
into
that was weird.
dungeon, you can start a new one. Now you could.
That's a weird and important.
Yeah.
The dungeon is removed from the game.
Oh,
This
back
action
up
A little
more.
bit more.
bottom of the card. As soon as the final room ability resolves, or it's countered or somehow leaves the stack,
Okay, so it goes
the
on the
dungeon
stack.
is removed from the game.
Okay. All
This
right, I get
action
it.
means
I get it.
you've
So those are
completed the
triggers.
dungeon.
Those are triggers. So you have 2 triggers going on, right? So if you have something that says, when this enters the battlefield, enter the dungeon, you have trigger, and then bam, the ability triggers on the dungeon. So you have 2 triggers that go off, is what it sounds like.
Well, one of the things that was weird about how he said it was, it leaves the stack and you have completed the dungeon. So if somebody counters or kills my creature or whatever, or counters the creature that says go on a venture, the dungeon should never happen.
Or I'm wondering too, if you're already in a dungeon and something tells you to venture, and then it does, and the trigger goes on the stack and gets countered, does the entire dungeon leave? That's weird.
I don't know.
Or it's countered or somehow leaves the stack, the dungeon is removed from the game.
No, because he said
This
the
action
final
means you've
ability.
completed the dungeon.
Okay, I get it
Completing
now.
a dungeon is great for a few reasons. The next time you venture into the dungeon, you can start a new one. Now, you could jump right back into the same dungeon you just completed.
Hey, look
for
at that,
another
answering
go.
all our questions.
Or pick a dungeon you haven't braved before. It's your story. Some cards like Gloomstalker offer rewards for dungeon completion. It doesn't matter if Gloomstalker was around for any of your dungeon adventures.
Wow.
Even if you completed a dungeon earlier in the game, Gloomstalker will have double strike.
That's so crazy.
Gloomstalker, 2 and a white for a 2/3 dwarf ranger. As long as you've completed a dungeon, Gloomstalker has double strike.
Yeah, so they're introducing these
dungeons
cards
are
that
filled with rewards
reference
that put you in a better
completing
spot
dungeons.
to win the game.
Wow.
Venture boldly but strategically and claim what is yours.
It's interesting. I'm looking at the numbers on these cards. 20, 21, 22. And like the card number on the bottom.
Oh, yeah, dude.
But they're telling us there's only 3 dungeons.
Well, I wonder if they're counting those cards that are like, like the art cards. I'm wondering if those are counting there too. There's no friggin' way there's like 20 dungeons, right? 20 plus dungeons. There's no way.
I don't know, but this certainly gives them a lot of space in the future
Yeah.
to make some very interesting designed cards.
God, that's
All right,
weird.
there's like 20 seconds left on this video. Let's see it out.
Jam it and slam it.
Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is available everywhere on July 23rd. Check out your local retailer or game store for more.
And just
Yeah.
add stuff. Okay.
So interesting. So we've got 3 dungeons. Brad pointed out the card numbers. I don't know if we're gonna get 20 plus dungeons. If we do, wow. Just think of all of like the complexity and decision making that I mentioned before, and just multiply that by eons. Like it just gets ridiculous, man. Yeah, I think that's really cool. I like the concept of this. I question how big of an impact it's going to have on these Eternal formats. And that's assuming, we're making a couple of assumptions here. And the first assumption is that they're not going to just straight ban them in like Vintage or Legacy.
Like pre-ban them?
Right. Or that the rules that already exist, such as no command zones and shit, just don't inherently ban them. That we're making the assumption that these will be in some way legal in these deep, deep Eternal formats.
I mean, it would be very odd for them to print a card into Standard that it doesn't go into Modern and Legacy and Pioneer.
So this will be in Standard. Like,
oh yeah, this is a Standard
The
set.
dungeons themselves will be in Standard. Oh
Yeah.
my friggin' word.
Yeah, this is not a special set of any kind.
God, I didn't know if the dungeons them. Oh my God, this is so ridiculous. This is gonna be in Standard, man. All right, that's just changed my whole view on this. This is so crazy. I don't know. For some reason, I thought this was like just a one-off, like Secret Lair style set, but not Secret Lair.
Gotcha.
This is wow.
Nope.
This is the next
Standard set.
Oh my God. This is just dumb.
And there is some
This
clarity here in
crazy.
the language. If you survive long enough, you'll reach the final room of the dungeon. After that room ability resolves or otherwise leaves the stack, the dungeon is removed from the game, which results in you completing it. Wow. So yes, if somebody stifles that last ability, you still get the dungeon counts as completed.
Okay. So how does it work if someone goes into room 2 and it gets stifled? Are you still in room 2, but the ability got stifled?
Right. You weren't in the last room, so you don't leave the dungeon.
Right.
It only matters, and it says you'll reach the final room after that resolves or leaves the stack.
So now it's very possible that they do print a lot more dungeons because this is going to be an entire set, and they're not just going to base this entire set off 3 dungeons.
Well, that's literally what they said at the start. At the start of the video, that these are the 3 dungeons.
Wow.
Dungeons are a major part of the D&D experience, and they're a big part of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. There are 3 dungeons in this set.
Including Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Which apparently these are all names that are probably known to traditional D&D players.
God, that's so weird with the card numbers then.
That's why I pointed it out.
It's throwing me off.
That's why I pointed it out.
It's really throwing me off, dude. Okay, so, even if there is 3 dungeons, like, it's like you said, they're not too busted. It's just like they make for some weird decisions and put your opponent in a weird spot. Like, I was looking at the Dungeon of the Mad Mage there. Yeah. And it's like when you get into room 3 or when you're in room 2 and you have something that's going to trigger you to go into room 3. Let's say we're in an Eternal format, right? And like, you could essentially use that to trick the ever-living shit out of your opponent. Like, maybe you have removal and they are going to spend a card because they think they got you next turn, right? Like, let's say, so I'm talking about Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Let's say we're in dungeon level, the dungeon level where we just scryed.
Yep.
And I play a card that's going to allow me to advance to the next room. And I get to choose whatever it is.
Yeah, trigger on the stack.
Yeah. My opponent could then think, okay, maybe he's trying to make it so that I don't kill him next turn with, this creature. But you know what? That's completely okay. I have a response on his turn. Maybe you have I don't know, something like to stifle that.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're just like, no, I'm going to create a treasure token because I have a Path of Exile that I'm going to use on your turn in case you have a Force of Negation. You know what I mean? Like, that sort of thing. And it puts you in a weird spot because it's like you don't know what they're going to choose, and the absence of knowing what's in their hand really can pay off. So it's like, I guess that's what I mean by like the metagaming of your opponent. Like, you could literally... You could use their choice of whether or not to let the spell resolve to tell you what might be in their hand.
Absolutely.
Like that is a big thing right there. Like,
it's your favorite part of the game.
It really is. Like, that right there, those two very different things that if you see them coming, you know what room we're in, you know what could happen, and you know the information on the board. It's like, okay, you could kill me next turn if, I don't stop your creature from attacking. So why would you allow that? You either don't have removal, or you can't stop this.
Right, because they would have to have a stifle.
Right, like you either can't stop this or you're planning something else. And then that can affect your decision when the dungeon goes off. Like, that is so cool, man. So, I really like that.
For sake of completeness, the 3 dungeons are the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the Tomb of Annihilation, and Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And depending on how you look at it, Dungeon of the Mad Mage is the most complicated. That's the one that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rooms. 6 rooms before you get to the end. Mm-hmm. Tomb of Annihilation you can get through in 3 turns or 3 moves. Depending on how you go, it could be 3 or 4 moves. The Lost Mine of Phandelver can be gotten through in 4 moves, but you have more choices, maybe, than Tomb of Annihilation. The reason why I point that out is there's a lot of interest to these. They do neat stuff. I'm simplifying it to say they're kind of like sagas. When you get to the end, what do you get at the end? So what do you get at the end of Mad Wizard's Lair?
So I will say
this. You go through this whole thing.
Yeah, the number of steps here really seems to pay off, because the more steps you have, it seems like the bigger the ultimate of the card is. And I would argue the Dungeon of the Mad Mage has probably the most game-ending ultimate. So these cards, these dungeons are like potentially game-ending.
Well, this is the only one that seems like it has one broken square in it.
Right. And it's the Mad Wizard's Lair at the end of Dungeon of the Mad Mage says, draw 3 cards and reveal them. You may cast one of them without paying its mana cost. That already fits into some decks in Standard.
No. If you're going to stifle, you're not going to stifle the Twisted Cavern effect. You're going to wait until the end and stifle that last room.
Or try to beat them before they get through the dungeon.
Yeah.
That's just another piece of the metagaming, the metagaming that I absolutely love, because I can't even explain the level of complexity that this adds to the game. Is it makes the decision-making tree in your average Standard game eons larger. Because now, is your opponent thinking a couple of turns ahead? Or are they, you can tell a lot about what's in their hand based on these dungeons. Like, I guess that's my main point. Like, based on how they respond. If you're running into like a control deck or a mid-range deck that will usually have responses to what you're doing, you can use those responses to gauge what might be in their hand and what their game plan might actually be. It's crazy.
And to your point earlier about just the increasing complexity of the game, like, this is a whole nother step up from sagas where you have to keep track of them every upkeep and move your counter up or whatever you're doing to run through the chapters of a saga. But you have to think, yes, if I don't have 3 venture cards in my hand, can I plan on making 2 1/1 black skeleton creature tokens in Muriel's Graveyard in the 5th whatever chapter or whatever you want to call it room of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage?
Yeah.
What do I need to draw to get there to have those 2 black creature tokens?
Nuts.
Yeah.
So nuts.
Just from that practical purpose, and like you said, what is this foreshadowing when they're acknowledging the command zone in constructed formats that are in competitive formats?
Yeah. Wow.
I don't even have the brain space for that, because there are definitely cards that they've made that reference, returning your commander to the command zone, or putting all commanders from the command zone onto the battlefield, or things like that. But I don't even know what cards might be out there that that this could interact with. Are there cards, once this is in the command zone, does that matter? I mean, you can't do anything with it without a trigger card that triggers it. So
right. It's so weird, man. It just introduces the command zone into Eternal formats. That's crazy. I can't wait to see what impact that has. They've had to have thought that out. I'm going to assume for once that Wizards of the Coast thought that out, and they looked at all of the cards that reference the command zone before printing cards that in Eternal formats can go directly or introduce the command zone into the game. I'm going to assume.
So one of the other things that's interesting about this set is they are acknowledging some creature types and character types from D&D. Again, not a huge D&D player by any stretch of the imagination, but I am just a little bit familiar with the Dragonborn, which are humanoid dragons.
Oof.
And one of the cards that they use to preview the dungeon mechanic is Nadar Selfless Paladin, a legendary creature dragon knight.
Beautiful.
2 and a white for a 3/3. A 3/3 for 3 with vigilance, and it's a legendary creature. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeon. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed a dungeon.
Wow.
So for this dude, you want to play him on turn 2 or 3, probably. You always want to be ahead of the curve. So I'm thinking at least turn 3.
Yeah.
If that's the cleanest. You enter into one of these dungeons. You want to be able to pump your team but as soon as you can. So you want to complete one of these dungeons.
Yeah.
The Tomb of Annihilation is the fastest one to do it, but you have to pass through an oubliette room in the dungeon that makes you discard a card, sacrifice an artifact, a creature, and a land.
Yeah, no one's choosing that. You mark my words. In Standard, ain't nobody choosing that.
No, but you're also going to lose 5 life to go the other way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't venture that way because you could, if you go oubliette style in the Tomb of Annihilation, you're losing 1, 2, 3, 4 cards just to get to the end of it. Whereas your other option is you could just lose 1 life and then only lose 2 permanents, because it says in Sandfall Cell it says each player loses 2 life unless they sacrifice an artifact, creature, or a land. And then before that, they say you lose 2 life unless you discard a card. So you're only technically, if you take the lowest life total loss way out, you're only losing 2 cards versus a quick jet to the end of the dungeon by losing 4 cards. It's kind of crazy. Like, I mean, I don't imagine many people would do that, but I don't know.
So
it's hard to tell.
I went on that whole little tangent because this really makes me wonder. One of the biggest flaws about Dragon tribal decks in any competitive format is that most dragons are like 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. Like you don't have a 1, 2, 3 curve of dragons, but we're looking at a 3/3 for 3 dragon creature that turns on things like Silumgar's Scorn and the Dragon Bolt. So there's a Dragon Bolt, there's a Dragon Counterspell. There's Dragon's Horde, which is an artifact that taps for mana for dragons and lets you draw cards.
And there's also this concept of like, you compared them to sagas.
Yeah.
And I do like the comparison because they kind of feel like sagas until you realize that they're not. And you could advance through an entire dungeon on your turn as soon as it's introduced.
Potentially. Oh, yeah.
Like, that's kind of nuts.
Yeah.
That's kind of nuts.
Right. Where a saga, you have to wait turn after turn after
right.
turn.
Like, there's no turn cadence really to this, although it feels like there is. But the busted part about it is there's actually not. Like,
right,
if
you just have to have all the triggers.
If you could ephemerate this guy.
Oh, snap.
You know what I mean? If you could ephemerate this guy, well, you could advance through an entire dungeon in a couple of turns. And before you know it,
We are going to get Ephemerate banned.
God, that's nuts, man. You just imagine you like play him, next turn attack, Ephemerate, blam, advance more, next turn Ephemerate comes into play. Oh my God, get out of town. It's just so nuts.
So the WotC website says check back June 29th through July 2nd for more card reveals and details about the mechanics in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, this is cool, man.
So I definitely wanted to talk about Dungeons because, I mean, that just got announced today. I saw it this afternoon, and it's a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hell of a drug. I look after looking at those dungeons multiple times, I don't see anything really broken about it. I will be surprised if there's anything there that makes people.
Well, bring it back up. Bring it back up the Mad Wizards, the Mad Mage dungeon again, or even all three of them. So I'm looking at them right now, and theoretically, right, like just think about it this way.
Excuse me.
Think about it this way. You could go like, here's my snap this up this week, because I seriously think, like, I've talked about this card before. We've talked about this card before. And when they keep printing these dragons on curve, like what you're talking about, like these 2-3 drop dragons, just makes me think, oh, wow. And you can also advance through dungeons, technically, if you can jam a ton of these into play at once. Well, how about Collected Company, like being a thing, with these friggin' dragons that are coming in? Can you just imagine? You have like a dragon that you Coco into, and then you have like something that blanks it, and then blanks it again, like Eldrazi Displacer or something. And you get both of these, and before you know it, you're advancing through a dungeon like next turn. It's like suddenly these dragons that have introduced the dungeon concept into these eternal formats.
Cooley is talking about this because one of his recent popular videos was him doing a world record speed run, killing in Diablo 2. He's all about these speed running dungeons. So that's why he's thinking he wants to Coco into effects that help him get through the dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Well, I'm just saying, man, it's possible. And I think we have to think about cards like that. Like, it's, Clark says, just nonsense. It really is. Like, it's the fact that at the end of the dungeon of the Mad Mage, granted, it takes a lot of steps to get there. You're going to have to trigger this a lot. But it's like, that's potentially a game-ending thing. Like, you know what I mean? Especially in these eternal formats, where you can manipulate the top of your library. You can, there's things you can do to ensure that when that goes off, shit gets stupid.
I think you'll still be able to play ultimatums at this point. So
yep,
you could potentially reveal the top 3 cards of your library and reveal an ultimatum and play it for free.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things. Even if you're playing this in a very fair sense, and like all you're trying to do is, maybe you play it in speaking of these Collected Company decks, like you play it in there was a Modern Masters card from the last set that gave you a bonus every time something exiled from the battlefield. Like you got a +1/+1 counter or something. Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Well,
it's like you could just. Like, what do? Do you focus on that guy, or do you focus on the shit that's like advancing you through the dungeon? And before you know it, boom. Like that goes off, even if you're playing it fairly and you draw 3 cards and you pick the best one and play it. What if you hit a Coco and you're just
you just play that for free?
You just do that. It's like the game falls so far out of your favor at that point that like it just gets nuts.
Free stuff is always broken. But the other thing is we're looking at, they've shown us 3 creatures that venture into the dungeon, but there's nothing to say that they don't have a, blue and a red, draw a card, venture into the dungeon. Blue and a red, deal 2 damage to target creature, venture into the dungeon. Like, we could have it on spells, we could have it in a million ways.
God.
But you're either going to need a bunch of mana or some really powerful stuff to zip through these in standard. So I have this page sort of cut off because the other card that I want to show off here is Evolving Wilds, of all things, which Evolving Wilds, in an art style reminiscent of original dungeon guides, and apparently there's going to be 8 lands that use this art style. that look like an adventure book. So, when you're playing D&D, you have your, well, I don't want to even talk like I know what I'm talking about, but you have your Dungeon Master's Guide, you have your Monsters Manual, you have your character books or whatever, but then you actually have adventures, dungeons, and they tell you sort of the sequence of events, and they look like this.
Yep.
So for people that haven't seen them, it's a purple background, it's full bleed purple background with the yellow swipe across the top left that says Dungeons and Dragons.
Beautiful. Dungeon
Module C7 Evolving Wilds, an adventure for characters, levels 1 through 4.
God, it looks really cool, man. And I have to say, now seeing this, and you remember when I was a little biased when they did the Rick Grimes, the Walking Dead Secret Lair, it was hard for me to see on the other end of like, this isn't the coolest effing thing they've ever done because I was such a big Walking Dead fan. But Brad's watch is going off, telling him something. Yeah,
it's telling me bullshit. Shut up. Shut up.
Dunk it in water. Throw it in your whiskey. That'll shut it up. If I had booze
in my drink, I would have done it.
But I gotta say this, as someone who doesn't play Dungeons and Dragons, I think this is the coolest looking thing ever. And I'm not at all offended that they've brought Dungeons and Dragons into the universe of Magic.
No.
And also, you guys know this about me. We've talked about this on the cast before. I don't give a shit about the story of Magic the Gathering. I know it's a great story. I'm not saying it's bad.
It just doesn't matter to you.
It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is cool decisions in cards and things that make other cards go up in price. And this is just one of those things.
So, speaking of cool-ass art and secret lairs, I want to show you some of the newest secret lairs because I don't know if you've seen them all. But number 2, did you see the announcement from WotC that they're going to solve the availability problem, quote unquote, solve the availability problem of secret lairs, and they're also going to solve the problem of mechanically unique cards only being available in secret lairs because they fully intend to print many more mechanically unique secret lairs.
Wow. Interesting. I wonder how they're going to do that.
I can tell you how.
How are they doing it?
Within 6 months of a release of a secret lair that has mechanically unique cards, they will include in the list a Magic the Gathering version of the card that will have a different name, and you will be limited to only 4 copies of either version. So they talked about this specifically in an announcement because they are doing
So they're doing it like Godzilla style.
Like Godzilla style, but the card's probably not going to have both names on it. And the reason is for licensing, they got the licensing to do the secret lair. They maybe don't have the licensing to then do it again as both properties blended the way they did with Godzilla.
Interesting.
So they announced that they're going to do a Stranger Things secret lair. It's going to be one of the next big ones. So
this is so weird. This is so weird to me and raises a lot of flag. I don't like this. I don't like the sound of this. But here's what I think immediately. Buy Walking Dead Secret Lair because they sure as hell can't do that again.
Nope. And they said that you won't be able to get the Walking Dead Secret Lair cards in this. That problem is not going to be resolved by this. This is only going forward.
And Jason Clack says, do you think we'll ever get the list sealed product? Maybe that's too out there, but they're going crazy these days. So who knows? I mean, who knows? But
the problem is the list does not introduce enough cards into the market to make a goddamn difference.
Right.
So the only thing it's going to do is either make a rarer version of the secret lair card.
Right.
Or just be more confusing.
Yeah.
But if you're familiar with, so I've heard some other folks talk about this and say, you buy the secret lair Gandalf, the secret lair Lord of the Rings, that they're supposed to do that crossover next year, and you get a Gandalf card. Well, 6 months later, you're going to be able to crack a regular booster pack, and it's going to have the White Wizard whatever card in it, and that is also a Gandalf card. So you can't, like in EDH, you can't run a Gandalf and a White Wizard.
So they're going to have to change something about the rules then, because I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, but like I'm pretty sure it says cards with the same name.
Yeah.
So like if they change up the name,
well, and that's it. I mean,
they're going to have to make it some sort of distinction and or reference to the original card, which could bring in licensing issues. Right. How can you say, like, you can't, this is what I mean by get Walking Dead, the Walking Dead Secret Lair, because you cannot use the name Rick Grimes in any reference that you do when you're talking about fantasy and all of this shit.
Don't sue us for saying the name Rick Grimes.
You just can't. Like, you can't put that out there and be like, all right, we're going to sell this product, and by the way, we're referencing Rick Grimes on it. That's like saying, you know, by the way, Superman. Like, you know, it's like a protected, licensed thing that, like, you just can't. So they're either going to have to change the rules or...
Well, and they just... Have you ever watched Aladdin?
Of course.
And they get to the end of the movie and they find out that Aladdin isn't a prince. And they're talking to the king or whatever.
Yep.
How did they resolve that?
Oh, Christ. I don't know. There was a genie involved in shit. I don't know. So long ago.
They said, aren't you the Sultan? Yes. Don't you make the rules? Yes. Can't you just say that it's okay for her to marry this dude? Oh, yeah. I'm in charge of the rules.
That's true. Yep. That's true.
They just say, this is how it is, and that's how it is. I mean, that's how they've handled everything else so far.
Wow, dude. That's so crazy. That's so nuts.
I just think it's going to be interesting that the version that comes out in the list might technically be more rare than the version in the Secret Lair.
Yeah. It's just very interesting. Like, I think, to me, that is sort of a signal of, hey, we fucked up.
Well, like, they had to acknowledge that if they were going to keep doing this, there needed to be a pressure release valve.
Yeah, there definitely has to be. And it's interesting because we weeks ago were rolling off of we literally made a comment about this licensing thing and Secret Lairs about like, how the hell are you ever going to go back on that? Like, how the hell are you ever going to reprint that? It's like you can't.
Well, and that was one of the things that we liked about those cards.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of the big things that we liked about it. But also, it makes me wonder how, like, I would like to see some specifics about that. Because if you're going to make a card, let's call it Dick Shines.
Instead of Rick Grimes.
Right. You got Dick Shines, and he's going to be your new guy, right? That does the exact same thing as Rick Grimes. If you're going to make it so that he can't, like, you can only use a total of 4 Dick Shines and Rick Grimes, you're going to have to write that into the rules somewhere or significantly change your rules to the point where I don't even know where you would go from here. Like, you know what I mean? You're going to have to make a reference to Rick Grimes at some point for that specific card. And then it calls into question, I would think it calls into question the licensing issue. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. However, I would still say if that is the case, and if they do print something into the list, right? Mm-hmm. And they are drawing attention to the fact that, hey, this card's actually usable and people like it. Get the original.
Yeah. Like,
get the original. That set was dope. Like, you got foils, and it's just like this for all Secret Lairs. Even the Cats one. If they could easily reprint a Robbo, the way that they did that, it was just an art thing. But, like, at the same time, that version, I would argue, would always be worth more than the original Robbo. Just because it's cool as fuck.
Way cooler, yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It just kind of goes back to that, where, like, okay, so what you're telling me is you're recognizing that there's a problem with reprinting these Secret Lairs. So if I'm taking a risk, and this might be a risky investment that I would say, like, I wouldn't say bet the farm on it, but take a look at some of those very unique Secret Lairs that they printed and the reasons why they might be thinking about changing the rules on these, and maybe take a risk and just say, yeah, all right, cool. I'm going to buy these ones. It's going to be extremely hard for you to reprint. You're going to have to change your entire rule set for it. Yeah, got them.
So I have the WotC announcement here, which is from earlier this month, June 7th. And they said, for players who love and are interested in the magic expression of some of their favorite characters and worlds, Secret Lair will offer uniquely collectible Universes Beyond cards featuring art and treatment that will draw you into a world well beyond magic. The goal is not, however, to hold back mechanical expressions in game pieces from players who don't purchase through our direct-to-consumer channel. For players who don't mind waiting or prefer cards and characters set in Magic's multiverse, we have you covered. For the next Universes Beyond Secret Lair, we plan to create and print versions of the mechanically unique cards approximately 6 months after their release in Secret Lair. The in Magic, that's a hyphenated word, in Magic, versions will be available on the list. Findable in set boosters for as long as players are still interested in opening them. To start, they'll appear on the list more frequently than other list cards to make them easier to find. And in the future, we may reprint those cards in other products as we'll have that flexibility. Right? So that the in-game Magic Universe version, they can print as much as they want for a card. These cards will be considered equivalent game pieces. And this is that sort of legalese, meaning you could only play 4 copies or 1 of either the Magic version or the Universes Beyond version in your deck.
Uh-huh. Okay. So now this goes into a level higher because now we have to, like, with all of this legalese bullshit that they put in here, you've got to assume that when they did this licensing deal, that they had a competent lawyer that fully understood what Wizards of the Coast does in the sense of reprinting and worked that in there. Like, hey, even though we're doing this licensing deal now, we're allowed to reprint this card as many times or in as many different forms as we want.
We plan to do this for all the upcoming soon-to-be-announced Secret Lair Universes Beyond partnerships. We do not plan to go back and do this for the cards from The Walking Dead.
Oh my God, they call it out specifically?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, double down. I'm buying one right now. I almost don't even care what they're worth. Like that is literally right there. That is the reserve list. They're doing the reserve list again. That's exactly what they're doing. This is them saying we're never printing Walking Dead again. For those of you
playing at home, it's 53 minutes, and we talked about the reserve list. That's a record.
Wow.
That's a record. It took us only 53 minutes to get to the reserve list.
That's insane.
But it is true. It's almost a new verbal agreement. But they also, like, they're good with their language when they want to be.
Yeah.
We do not plan to. That could be that leaves room for subject to change.
Yeah, again, licensing.
Yeah.
It goes back to the licensing thing.
Right.
This is literally the only set that they've called out names from another franchise. Mm-hmm. And they've made that the actual name. They haven't made an alternate name like the Godzilla shit. They made it a legitimate card like Rick Grimes, or Michonne or Daryl. Like, you can't just do that. Like, I am reading this, and the more I look into it, the more I am seeing what we saw way back in the day after Chronicles, where they say, okay, by the way, we will promise never to reprint this shit because we understand we are hearing your concerns, Magic community. That's exactly what they're saying here.
Yep,
we're hearing your concerns with these unique mechanics. And we're going to promise that we can reprint them because we're going to call them something different. We're going to take the Godzilla approach with every future Secret Lair and then specifically call out the Walking Dead Secret Lair and say, yeah, we can't go back and do that.
Yeah. Which that particular Secret Lair hasn't appreciated in value all that quickly so far, but it was also the most highest selling Secret Lair that they had up to that point that they've told us about.
And if we look back in toy or gaming history, all of the factors are here for Walking Dead characters to, in 20 years' time, fetch an ungodly price in Magic the Gathering.
If there's a resurgence 2 decades or something down the road from now where it comes back into fashion.
Or even if it doesn't, like, it was one of those things that, like, it was a very limited print run and release, unable to be created again,
Mm-hmm.
and highly popular and desired at the time.
So what happens with all of those sort of franchises, though, and what you're sort of talking about is there are people, if you like right now, or even I would say we're kind of over it now, but Transformers as a franchise had a huge resurgence because there was a nostalgia for people from the 80s and 90s watching the cartoons, right? It took 25 years or something and 30 years.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, the Transformers movies are coming out. That was so cool. I loved those when I was a kid. And now I'm 45 and have money to blow.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is people that were 20 watching The Walking Dead, when they're 45, 50 years old, are going to, that's what I mean by a resurgence of something that has to bring it back up into their awareness.
Agreed.
But they're going to have a nostalgia for it.
Exactly. Just like the toy market works like this all the time.
Nice, Jason.
Resurgence via nostalgia. Exactly. Like in the toy market works like this. Like I should have sold my original Millennium Falcon 5 years ago because the price has actually gone down.
Yeah.
And I didn't see that coming. I also didn't ever think that a toy I played with when I was a kid would be worth like $300. But at the same time, that's exactly the point, is like the resurgence via the nostalgia. There's that certain group of people that want it, that desire it. That
Have you seen Wheel of Fortune?
No, never.
So you had two Snap This Ups. From what I'm hearing, you talked about Collected Company.
Yep.
And you talked about the Walking Dead Secret Lair.
Walking Dead Secret Lair. Yep.
I am going to say that you should look at Dragon's Hoard, the artifact Dragon's Hoard. Just because we are literally going into the Dungeons and Dragons set, we are going to have a bunch more dragons, things that will trigger that card. And I would say sell your Mishra's Baubles.
I think that's fair.
I think that they're going over $20 now. I don't know if you got them when we talked about them in Double Masters
at $4, $4 or $5.
Yeah. If you can literally, even if you can get out for 15 a piece, you went from 16 to 60. That's a hell of a week.
Yep. Absolutely. And there's a big demand for them right now because of the Loris decks that are popping up in Modern.
All the Loris decks, the Prowess decks, and the Dragon's Rage Channeler decks.
There's so many things that just reward this card that now is approximately the time to sell, I would think. Yep, like that's... Your risk is this. You do have a risk by letting them go at like $20, you know what I mean? Your risk is these decks take over Modern, and you need 4 of them to play Modern.
Well, and I would probably even say, if there's any likelihood you're going to play one of these decks, just hold on to them because you don't want to have to rebuy them again.
Right.
And they were just reprinted in Double Master, so I wouldn't expect to see this card for another year. That being said, it's an uncommon. If it gets up to, I'm surprised they're not pouring out of the woodwork right now at $20.
Yeah.
Like, people are got to be starting to clean their closets out to sell these things back to vendors.
Yeah.
And events are coming back. So as much as I preached about my expected increase in Modern's portfolio value, once we have a few events, people are going to be pitching cards back to vendors. There's going to be a short dip. So this is selling the peak.
Yep.
In my estimation.
I think so too, man. I think that's a fair call, and it's just like we said when I suggested selling tainted packs at $40. Yes, you did miss out on another spike. Mm-hmm. However, boom, reprint. You know what I mean? Like now it's gone down in price, or it will continue to go down in price. Yep. It's just one of those things where you can't really. If we could predict the peak of every goddamn Magic card out there, we wouldn't be doing this podcast. We'd be off on fucking Hawaii right now. Yeah. You know what I mean? But all we're saying is this is probably a good time where you're gonna, if you bought them when we talked about them, it's probably a good time to let them go. You're not going to be sorry you did in a year or so.
Exactly. If there's another 10% or 20% or 30% to be made by the guy after you, but you already made 200%, that's just fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good calls, man.
Yeah.
Good calls. Get those Walking Dead secret layers. That's the new reserve list, guys. You heard it here first.
The new reserve.
New reserve list, Walking Dead secret layer. They have admitted it right here. They fucked up. They can't go back. Get them. Don't be caught without them. Don't be caught with your pants down here. New reserve list.
If you want to be caught with your pants down, hit that like and subscribe button. And we'll know you're a weirdo and you're our kind of people. You've listened to the SnapCast podcast all the way through. We're awfully proud of you, and we hope you will join us every Thursday. If you like to listen to your podcast on your ride to work, you can download us on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever. And if you can't find us, message me here on YouTube or on Twitter at the SnapCast Pod. You can find Cooley at Cooley with 3 O's, or on YouTube in YouTube/Cooley if you want to watch some Diablo 2 content. And we will be here for you every week to talk about all the cool hot shit coming out in Magic every week.
See you guys next week.
Peace.